Energy Nerd Show is like that Cooking with Jeannie and YouTube show, except it's not as boring.
Hey!
Hey nerds. This is Energy Nerd Show and Tell. We're excited about episode 1. Really excited about our guest. Who's our guest?
Cutler Cleveland.
Oh, cool.
And you know what?
No, what?
Cutler is one of the reasons I moved to Boston.
Seriously?
Yeah, I was looking for grad schools. I came up for an info session, and he and Robert Kaufman did such a compelling presentation. I chose BU.
Totally changed your life.
Totally changed my life. Here I am. Yeah.
Man, thanks, Cutler. And thanks for agreeing to be on the inaugural episode of Energy Nerd Show and Tell.
So here's our conversation with Cutler.
So thanks for the graph. I think 100 years of perspective is awesome and interesting. And what do you want to tell us about it?
It's an interesting graph that I show a lot when I teach on subjects related to energy transition and climate change. Anytime you show a series of this length related to any kind of energy or economic data, it reflects a lot of different social, economic, environmental, technological forces that produce the trends that you see. And it's very relevant for some of the key questions today. Principally, how fast can we make the transition off of hydrocarbons to clean energy, to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. So this is data for the U.S. The recent data is from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, then we reconstructed some older data from other sources. And it shows what percentage of all the electricity generated in the U.S. comes from different sources. So what are some of the key things that always jump out for me at this graph? The story, on the one hand, of how long major energy transitions historically have taken to unfold. And we're talking many, many decades for a major shift from one type of energy source to another. And if you look at that top line, which is the fraction of electricity generated by coal, what's interesting to me is that, on the eve of the 21st century, coal was generating just as much electricity as it did in 1920. It's really amazing. You think about everything that happened during that period, all the new energy sources that came online and all the technical innovations and economic growth. Every aspect of our world changed, yet coal remained this very dominant source of energy. That suggests, geez, we have to make this rapid transition to renewables. That's going to be really hard, which is true, but if you look at the tail end of that coal graph, things are changing very quickly. This big drop, particularly in the last 15 years, where coal has been replaced largely by gas, but also by wind and solar. The gas story is interesting. So why has this happened? Well, one, there's a lot of things happening. One is interest in climate change and people realizing that coal has to go away quickly in order for us to meet greenhouse gas limits. Another one is the advent of technology in the oil and gas sector. Hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling in the shale gas boom just flooded the market with all this cheap gas and enabled this great expansion of natural gas. And so things are changing very quickly. So that's on the optimistic side. More on the pessimistic side related to climate change is wind and solar. So they're still tiny, very tiny fraction of the total. And even though if you look at the last couple of years, and Bruce, you know more about this than I do, if you look at the fraction of new capacity additions in the US in the last couple of years, I think that wind and solar are on the order of half or close to it of new capacity additions. So the rate of change is very quickly. You can look at the steepness of those slopes of the wind and the solar curve, but overall capacity base is so large, it's taking time to turn this base over. So it's a real challenge. And it speaks to the fact that any type of sort of business as usual scenario related to what caused these transitions to unfold isn't going to do it. In regards to climate, we need new levers, new pressure points, new forces to accelerate the change.
When you look back at the 80-year trend of coal just kind of hovering around 50%, and then with the availability of cheaper natural gas, that's when that transition happened. But then if you think about renewables, the fuel is free. So it's not even just cheap gas, it's free fuel. What do people think about why the technologies maybe haven't taken off as quickly when you realize how much the operating costs are so much lower and free fuel and everything like that when it affects the other markets so much?
With the levelized cost of onshore wind is as cheaper than natural gas. Same solar PVs are a little bit higher, but their cost is falling even faster than wind is. And so you do have this incentive to build, on the face of it, to build renewables. However, you still have these very powerful political interests who have all this massive sunk costs and all this infrastructure, all the way from the farthest upstream down to local distribution networks for gas and electricity. And they are less concerned, despite what they oftentimes say. The way they act indicates they are still invested in building this infrastructure. So you have to radically change the economic incentives in order to make this happen.
Yeah, one thing I was looking at in this graph is if you go back to 1978, there was the Fuel Use Act. You see some trends happening there, like coal bumping up about 10 percentage points, but then that just put the eventual decline out another couple decades.
That piece of legislation, of course, as you know, was during the so-called first energy crises in 73, 74, and again in 1979 and 1980, associated largely with political events in the Middle East, which roiled energy markets. And for the first time, really, in more than half a century, we had substantial increases in the real price of oil and gas. And so those increases in the price of oil and gas, which caused economic havoc, favored coal over oil and gas, which are relatively then more expensive than coal. And you had a lot of legislation like that federal policy that you mentioned, which I think essentially forbid the use of oil to generate electricity, which pushed us towards coal.
You see it in the graph, right? Oil just drops.
Right. And I think that 1978 Act actually forbid the use of oil to generate electricity. From one perspective, that makes a lot of sense. It's too valuable a fuel to waste generating electricity, but it did have this effect of helping to promote coal. So I think some of the challenges and opportunities are kind of clearly laid out. We're in a different space of energy transitions where the climate imperative now trumps, everything else, really, if you take a broader social perspective, and we need something other than the forces that generated these patterns in the past to kick in to get us going on the path towards clean energy.
Yeah, and we'll need to clean up the electric grid in this direction in order to use the electricity to clean up buildings and transportation, right, for fossil use.
As you both well know, the key to decarbonization is, electrifying services like heating, lighting, and mobility that are currently powered by fossil fuels, and then at the same time clean up the electricity. Our discussion today has kind of showed some of the challenges and opportunities associated with getting greenhouse gases out of the electricity supply.
Yeah, and there have been points in the past where we've made pretty big transitions over 10 or 15 years.
Absolutely. Well, you pointed one out, that Policy Act, boom, you see it immediately. So you could imagine some type of carbon tax or, something like the Obama Clean Power Rules. If those things which have real bite to them can get implemented, you can really start to accelerate these trends quite quickly.
And I think examples like this are really helpful when you have young people today, especially saying, we have to get this done. And then there are the naysayers who say it's already too late. We can't get it done. If we all work together, if we get these policies changed, it is possible.
Yep, absolutely.
So thanks, Cutler. Thanks for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity and to be your inaugural energy nerd. I will put that on my CV immediately and see if it helps in my annual merit review.
Awesome.
Thanks. Publish papers or be on our show.
Yeah. Thank you. Take care.
Take care,
See
Cutler.
ya.
Thanks for watching. This is Energy Nerd Show and Tell.
It's the show that we want to watch, so we're thinking maybe some of you energy nerds want to watch it too. If you do, then tell your friends and subscribe right around here. Click there,
And check
or there, or over here.
Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and where
Yeah,
else.
and the Energy Nerd website at energynerdshow.com. You can always go there. And if you want to be a guest, you can volunteer to be a guest. We love to have guests. In fact, that's kind of what the show is all about.
Absolutely.